All right, hey everybody. Thanks for waiting. We're going to get started with elements of design and how to work with a designer. So my name's Annika Stitch. I'm here with my wonderful colleague Sean Miller, and we'll be talking to you today about business website basics, elements of design, and how to work with a designer. This webinar is something that we want to be applicable to people who are maybe building their website for the first time or thinking about hiring a designer or even just like using a template. And we want it to be really jargon free and just a really good resource for you. Just a quick introduction if you don't know who Zoho is or what Zoho is, and also I'll do a quick introduction about the series. So Zoho's been around since 1996. We're a software as a service company. We make business applications, so everything from finance, marketing, sales, support, stuff like that. And what I wanted to point out is that we're private, we're bootstrapped, and we are profitable. So that means that we don't take any outside funding. We also don't have any ads in any of our free applications, or I'm sorry, any of the free versions of our software applications, and we're not like selling your data or anything. So that's just like a quick introduction about Zoho. Oh no, for some reason, let's see. I can see that other people can hear. I think my colleague was letting me know that he actually can't hear anything. Try to go ahead and refresh if you're having trouble, but it looks like everybody else in the audience can hear me. And I did mention go ahead and refresh your page if you're having any technical difficulties. So that's Zoho in a nutshell. And then I also wanted to give you a quick intro to the series. So this is a series meant that's sort of like entry level. It's business website basics. And next week we'll have a webinar on converting visitors to leads. So basically everything you've learned in this webinar and the last two, kind of building up to converting those visitors on your websites into leads. And then finally, if you want to learn anything else about Zoho and you're curious about our applications, go ahead and join us on week 5. That's September 23rd. It's also a Wednesday for the Zoho One for Every Business Need webinar with Victoria. And if you would like to join that, you can go to this website here. This is our landing page, and one of my colleagues will kindly put that in the chat. And you can go ahead and bookmark that, or you could just register now if you would like to. And now that I've kind of done all the housekeeping stuff, I'm going to jump into the presentation and give you a few takeaways. So what I would like to go over is knowing where to start if you're designing your own website. It can be really overwhelming. And just knowing what that first step can be, I think is really helpful. At least it's helpful for me. Also, I wanted to give you a basic understanding of visual hierarchy. I think understanding that will give you a good foundation for kind of putting all the elements of a web page together. And it also kind of sounds scary, so I want to make it like just a little bit easier to understand and really simplify that concept. And then my colleague Sean will be going over misconceptions and jargon. He'll also be going over how to talk with the designer, and he is a graphic designer, so I think this part's going to be really helpful for you. You never know when you might need to hire someone, and I think this part is really worth sticking around for, especially helpful resources. There's some really, really helpful resources there as well. And now I wanted to talk about why this is important. So of course, I know you all believe this is important or you wouldn't be here, but just to sort of drive this home, your design, your web design especially, is your first impression on a lead. And you want to keep that lead on your page for, as long as possible, because that means you have a higher chance of converting them into like a customer. So you want to make sure that everything is looking right and given a good impression of your business or your organization. And so this files into brand perception. You want to show that you're credible and you're trustworthy. You want to drive home your unique brand voice. And we do have a past webinar about brand voice. If you'd like us to send that to you, just let us know. And you also want to show that you are up to date. And what I mean by up to date is not just like how your website looks, like having a modern look or something. Your aesthetic is your own, but being up to date also means that your site like functions and it works. And this is something that Sean will get into in more detail later. But what I wanted to say about this is that your design, it's not just about how something looks, it's also about how it functions. It's about how you can actually serve the visitors of your website to make sure that everything is flowing like it should be. So a key question that I have for you that you should think about before you start building your website is, how does your website actually serve its visitors? So it's not just about how something looks or how like artsy something is or something like that. It's also about how it functions. And so, a good first step for this, as you are planning out your website, whether you are building it yourself or you're using a drag and drop template or you're hiring someone to do this, I have a first step for you that I think is going to be really helpful. So, my first step for you is making this website map. Maybe it seems really boring or something like you might not want to do, but I promise that it'll save you some time in the long run. I got this example from a graphic designer on YouTube, and she was just kind of going over like revamping her website, and she just made a couple bullet points of like why people are going to her site. So maybe you can write down a couple of bullet points of like why people are going to your site. Maybe they are going for some information. Like she said, they're either going for educational information, content, or they're going to hire her. That's what they're going to her website for. So think about like your customer journey and think about why your site visitors are going to your website. So are they going for information? Are they going for entertainment? Are they looking for a particular product or service? Or are they doing some sort of combination of those things? And you can really think about your customer journey here. And like I said, it's not just about how the site looks, it's also about how the site serves its visitors. So you want to make sure that the things that they're looking for are easy to find and easy to navigate to. So when you map out your entire site, it gives you a better idea of how you can effectively guide your customers in their customer journey. And we actually do have a workbook on customer journey. I think one of my colleagues will be able to put that in the chat for you as well. So think about this. You can just do this on a piece of paper. You don't need like a fancy application or anything to do this. You can just write this down on a piece of paper. So now that I've kind of given you this first step, and like I said, this is going to be useful for you whether or not you're using like a template or doing it yourself or hiring a designer, and it'll just give you some a way to think about things kind of like longer term and map everything out. I want to go over a concept that you can utilize in your websites or in anything you're designing, really. And it sounds kind of scary. I did mention it briefly before, but it's called visual hierarchy. And Sean and I were talking about this, and we're like, wow, this is really jargony. They really tried to make this, not super accessible. But the way that I like to explain it, and the way Sean explained it to me, which I thought was really helpful, was like, one, it's attention grabbing, and two, it conveys information by order of importance. So I have an example for you that I think is really going to drive this home, which is this hero banner, or this banner, sorry, on like REI. It's like an outdoor sporting goods adventure, whatever store. So I went to their website and they were having a big Labor Day sale. And so my example of visual hierarchy is like, they're using the size and the scale of this font. They're using some contrast here to really make those three words pop. And so that the most important thing that you're supposed to learn from this banner at the very top of the page is that there's a Labor Day sale, and everything underneath it is, important. But the most important thing that you need to know is that there is a sale going on Labor Day. And so that's a way that you can like utilize visual hierarchy, is like you're giving them something attention grabbing. You're conveying that information by order of importance. So that you can effectively guide and like help the visitors on your site understand what you think is most important for them to understand. And so there's a couple different tools that you can use to like implement visual hierarchy. And so I have a list here, and they're also in that wonderful handout that Sean made. Look at this beautiful handout. It's called Elements of Design. And here are some of the tools that you can learn about in that handbook, and that I'll briefly go over now. So one is size, or a better word for this might be like scale. So you saw the three big words that said Labor Day sale, right? They're the biggest, they're the most important, they're the things that I'm going to read. There's also color, so bright colors typically attract more attention than muted ones. There's also contrast, so dramatically contrasted colors are more eye-catching. They're also easier to read from like an accessibility standpoint. Also alignment. So you can have a bunch of elements that are maybe aligned to the left and one element that's aligned to the right. And that one that's aligned to the right is going to be the most eye-catching. The next one I think is super important, and it's a really good tool to have, which is a repetition. So these like motifs that you have on your site that are styles that can suggest maybe that content is related, like purple means one thing, blue means another thing, or this icon means this on every single page, something like that, where you're kind of repeating these different elements to say, hey, this content is related, and helping people who are looking for a certain type of content find it more easily. There's also white space. So if you have more space around the elements, it's going to draw the eyes towards them. And there's a couple other tools that you can use as well, like texture and style, things like that. And that's something that's in that workbook as well. But if you have any questions on that, go ahead and pop that into the questions module, and we can get to it at the end as well. And so now that I have given you a couple tools, what are we going to talk about next? Well, I want to talk about how you can implement those tools and kind of like a next step. So you know what you can do, and now you have to sort of implement them. And how are you going to implement them? How are you going to organize that? So that's what I'm thinking about next is how are you going to organize like your text? How are you going to organize your photos or icons or CTA forms if you have forms on your website? And Sean and I talked about this a bit, and he gave the suggestion to use a grid. So this might not be something that you want to use, but if you are like super organized or you want to get a way to like measure space and keep your content looking neat and organized, this is something really simple that you can do. And you don't even need like a program to do this. You can do this with pen and paper, which is basically just, drawing this grid on a piece of paper to help you measure space and keep your content looking organized. You can think of it like training wheels for design. And like I said, you can just use this on a piece of paper. And so how you actually implement this is if you are, for example, designing your website, you want to draw out a grid and you want to see how those different elements like photos or text or forms are laid out on this grid and how they look in relation to each other and how they're sort of like spaced out. And another way that you can use this grid is to help you identify visual points of interest. And you can also use a grid to direct the eye movement of a user's eye. So at least when your site visitors are used to reading English from left to right and top to bottom, the Z formation is like a really natural eye movement. So if you're designing a web page and you want it to feel really natural or something, you can test out using this Z formation. You can see how it's laid out here, where we have this black and white striped box at the top left, which is where we would naturally start reading a page, right? And then it kind of goes down in this Z formation to direct your eye in sort of like this natural movement. And Sean also added this pro tip here, which is if you're using a drag and drop site builder and you sketch your page out on a physical piece of paper, you can identify what is and isn't working as far as the arrangement of the content goes. So you can kind of see if something is like out of alignment or if something conflicts with another element that's on your page. And I know element sounds weird, but it's just like your text box or form or like a photo or an icon or something like that. And so once you've identified, maybe where there's like a conflict, you can look for a template that's similar to what you've drawn out on your grid. So you can use this. You can use this or you cannot use this. It's up to you. If this seems like way too overwhelming and you don't even want to bother with the grid, that's totally valid. But it is a nice tool to have, and you can use it whether or not you are using like a drag and drop builder, doing it yourself, or even hiring somebody to do this for you, just so you have like a nice general idea of how you want something to be laid out. And so if this seems overwhelming and you think hiring a designer would help you and be the best way to go, Sean actually has some really helpful tips for you. So I hope you'll stick around. He also has some great resources.
I am Sean Miller. As Annika mentioned, I am a graphic designer here at Zoho. I actually have kind of transitioned into another team. I work for the customer advocacy team here at Zoho, but I still do a lot of graphic design. That's part of my daily work. And I have to say, I'm extremely excited to do this. I've wanted to do one of these webinars for a long time. And I think Annika did a great job putting this together. And I hope you find everything that I have to share really useful. So let's go ahead and get into it. We will be talking about how to talk to a designer if you're deciding to hire a designer, but we will also be kind of getting into the ways that designers think. And that'll be helpful for you if you're somebody who's going to be tackling this project on your own. So when it comes to who's going to benefit from this material, it's going to benefit those of you who are business owners who, as I said, are going to do this on your own. But also when it comes to hiring a designer, you're going to find this information really useful. And also, for those of you, I know I was looking through the chats, it seemed like there was at least one of you that might be working with a central design team. This is also going to benefit you when it comes to asking people for help when it comes to marketing, campaigns, landing pages, social media graphics, things like that. So if you're working with a central design team, I think you'll find this beneficial as well. So what are we going to talk about? Well, in my half, we're going to clear up a few misconceptions about design, and that's going to be done by understanding the function of design. And those misconceptions can kind of blur things for you and make things a little bit confusing, but it's really easy to understand as soon as we clear up the misconceptions. And we're going to do that by talking about jargon. Is that something you need to know? Is it essential? And also, is that going to affect the ultimate goal? That being making a website that is a strong website, something that people want to engage with. And really, it's going to boil down to two of your most powerful tools and how to utilize those tools. Uh, I like to call them show and tell and clear communication. Those that last one might go without saying. We think, well, yeah, obviously I need to communicate clearly, but I'll demonstrate for you as we get through this presentation how communication can really affect the outcome of your website for better or worse. And then I'm going to share some resources for how to find a designer and what to look for when you're hiring a designer, and resources for you if you're going to be doing this job yourself. And then we'll end with a question and answer. So let's get right into it. Let's clear up these misconceptions and find out whether or not you need to understand the terminology. So the first misconception that I would run into more often than not as a freelance designer is that a lot of times people think art and design are the same thing and that those two things are interchangeable. Um, they are not. They are two separate disciplines, but the reason that this misconception exists is because there is art in design and there is design in art. But the function of these two things are completely different. And when we understand the function, we can start to see how these disciplines uh, function differently. So with design, that's its primary role or function is to deliver a message clearly, concisely, with the fewest amount of frills. Once that message is able to be delivered clearly, then you can kind of start to embellish it with some of the more artistic things. Whereas art, that is dealing with more of the feeling. That's its primary function, is to get the user to feel a message. So as it relates to your website, these two things overlap and they work together to deliver the message. And in this case, when we're talking about the message, we're talking about your brand story or your brand message. So if we don't have the misconception cleared up, what can happen is we're going to start to get this conflict that happens, and the message might become a little bit blurry. So if you notice down there at the bottom of the slide, I've included a little note that says, somebody who's a great artist will not always be a great designer. And this is really, really important to keep in mind if you decide to hire somebody to help you with your web design. It would be good to find somebody who is a good artist, but when it comes to actually making the website, you might not always find what you're after if you hired an artist. And I will get into that a little bit more. I'll demonstrate how this can actually work against you. So if I bring your attention back to the middle bit of the diagram here, I like to call that message distortion. So if we place too much importance on one side, or we don't understand the difference between art and design, this can result in something called message distortion. So to avoid that, it's helpful to understand both sides of the diagram. So for the sake of this presentation, I made this little thing here for you. It's by no means an exhaustive representation of all of the things that will fall on this side, but as it pertains to what we're talking about, you can see we're starting to get into a little bit of the terminology and the jargon here. Uh, what we're talking about on this half pertains to UX. You might be familiar with that, or the user experience of your website. This basically deals with how the user interacts with your website. And you can see, as Annika mentioned earlier, site mapping. That is one thing that definitely falls under the umbrella of UX design. And information architecture, we talked a little bit about that through the use of hierarchy. Uh, if we focus on the other side of the diagram, the more artsy side, this would be described as the UI, or the user interface. So this really pertains to how a user feels when they're interacting with the content on your website. And a lot of these things will be affected by the visual presentation of your website through the use of fonts or typography, the colors that you choose to use. They might be really bright, attention grabbing, or dull and muted. It just kind of depends on the overall feel or the vibe that you're trying to convey. And when these two things come together, really, as it pertains to your website, it's creating a strong message. These two things, while they are different, they come together and overlap to create a strong brand story, and definitely influence what users do and how they feel about your website and your brand. Um, just a little side note, I didn't mark this down, but as I was going through this, I was thinking that it is important to know that when you're hiring a designer, there are designers that are they design specifically with UI or UX in mind. So that would be something to keep in mind when hiring a designer. Maybe they specialize in UX or UI. They probably dip their toe in a little bit of both, but just to keep that in mind, there are people dedicated to both sides of this diagram here. So at this point, you might be looking at this thinking, oh my gosh, I'm in way over my head. There's some terminology here that I don't understand, but don't worry. This is very easy. I'll hold your hand through this and we'll get through it together in a really fun way, and it'll be very easy to understand as long as we stick to the basics. So as I mentioned, what we're trying to avoid is message distortion. And you might be thinking, well, what is message distortion? Well, I've come up with a couple ways to illustrate this for you, and they are very, very simple and maybe even oversimplified, but I think they do the trick. So let's take a look at something we're all familiar with. So here's an example of message distortion. Now, if you look at the example on the left with the stop sign, that's something we've all seen. We're all familiar with this. There's no frills involved. It's just a big red eye-catching sign, and it delivers the message to stop. Now, if for some reason somebody thought, the stop sign needs a redesign and we want to make it fancy, if you look at the message that's being delivered to the right, it becomes a little confusing about what we're stopping for exactly. Maybe this would convey the message that you need to stop for some year-end closeout, blowout sale at a store. It doesn't register as this is a traffic stop sign. The message is still the same, the word is the same, but because this is something unfamiliar to us, or it's starting to distort the message, we don't really know what we're stopping for. So this is like I said, an oversimplified example of message distortion through the use of shapes. Now we can do that again. This is another fun example. Message distortion through the use of fonts. This is I can't take credit for this because I learned it from somebody else. This is something called type tasting. So what I would like you to pay attention to is the emotional reaction that you get when you look at these words. Now it's the same exact word, but the one on the top, when we read the word surprise this way, we're thinking, oh, well, this might be something we see in a birthday card or an anniversary card. We associate good things when we see the word surprise written out this way. Now, on the bottom, this is more of a surprise, you've just been attacked by a werewolf. And surprise, you are now a werewolf as well. These are two different ways that the word surprise can be basically the emotion behind it changes based on the visual presentation. So these are very important to keep in mind because sometimes we can get excited when we see a cool font and we want to use that. And we just need to make sure that it's delivering the right message. Now, these are obviously extreme examples, but it goes to prove that it can deliver, your message can be distorted based on the way something is visually presented. So we're going to expand on this a little bit later as we move through this. So now you have a pretty good understanding of what message distortion is. You can see that it's important to understand what that is because talking to a designer involves having a basic understanding of how a designer thinks, whether they are a UX designer or a UI designer. You can see, there's choices that they make when it comes to delivering the message. And if you're somebody who's going to set out and do this yourself, I think going through those slides and seeing how the message can become distorted is really helpful when it comes to making choices. And really, to avoid message distortion, you need to be intentional with the choices that you make. And now this gets us to the goal and why this is all important. Well, we've been told many, many times not to judge a book by its cover, but unfortunately, that's what we do oftentimes. And it's the same thing with websites. Usually, a person's first interaction with your business is going to be with the website. So, a lot of times, that's going to be their first impression. And in many cases, that will be their lasting impression if your message is distorted in any way or it's unclear to them. Uh, and really, a well designed website shows that you, the business owner, care about what you do. And I really can't overstate the importance of that because when people see that you care about what you do, it gives them confidence to interact with your business and your brand. And once that confidence is established, then you can start to build loyalty and trust, and hopefully they will return to you again and again. So, if at any point you start to feel like this, that is totally understandable. That is completely okay to feel that way. And to be honest, I've been a designer for, man, 5 years now, I guess, and I can still feel like this. There's a lot of terminology that goes over my head. Um, so is it really important to understand this? Well, yes and no. I mean, there are some things that we should know, but as I mentioned early on, we have tools that are available to us as people who are talking to designers or setting out to do this ourselves. And if you were feeling like that previous slide, I can get rid of that feeling for you through exploring the tools that we have. So let's focus on this first one. The first tool is what I like to call show and tell. Now, when it comes to show and tell, what I'm talking about is the use of a mood board. Now, because of sites like Pinterest, we're all pretty familiar with what a mood board is, even if that's not what we call it. This is basically a collection of all of the things that we think are cool. So I put this one together because I thought, this kind of reflects my style. These are things that I like. And this is basically the best way, in my opinion, from somebody who has worked as a designer and has also hired a designer. This is very, very effective when it comes to showing somebody what it is that you like and what you have in mind for your own website. So, why this is so important is, as we mentioned, it shows people or the designer what you like, but it does so much of the communication for you. So you don't really need to know any of the terminology because excuse me, a designer is going to look at this example and say, okay, I know kind of what they're looking at here. I can get a sense of their taste and what they're after. So the mood board is acting as a compass to keep you and your designer on track when you're creating your website. And that last point that I highlighted there in blue, this is so important because it is a showcase of your personal taste, your style, and your personality. So when you put your personality and connect that with a strong message, this is going to result in authenticity. And authenticity is, yeah, I mean, there's no way I could prove this, but I would tend to think that it's one of the most important, if not the most important thing for somebody coming to your website to feel that you are authentic. Again, that is going to establish trust in your brand. Um, Now, when it comes to your mood board, as important as that mood board is, it is also important to not become married to any one thing or any one style that you use. Um, there is no right or wrong, and there is no good or bad source of inspiration. It's all good. However, what works for one website may not work for yours. So, for instance, if you direct your attention to the bottom example that I have there, the one with the pink stripe in the middle. Now, I chose this because I thought it was cool. I like that it's kind of obnoxious with how loud it is, and the colors are very, very attention grabbing. But if you were to think, well, I run a dentist office or I run a tax preparation service, even though I think this source of inspiration is cool, is that going to work for my particular message, my business, and my brand? Well, if you are trying to convey the sense that you are the coolest, youngest, hippest dentist on the block, well, yeah, that might work. But if this does not fit with your company culture or even your logo or something like that, that might not be the direction to go. It is something that you should use as a source of inspiration. Your designer could probably pull something useful from that, but it's important to not be married to it because it just might not work and it could result in message distortion. So, this slide is specifically geared towards somebody who's doing this by themselves. If you find yourself in that position, this is something that I think might be beneficial to you. Now, the presentation is what we're all working toward. That's kind of the fun thing. We can't wait for people to see our bright, new, shiny website, and we love it. We've put all this time and energy into it. However, in the case of a waiter, they don't bring the individual ingredients to the table. They bring a fully formed meal to the table. So you can't put the presentation in front of all of the hard work. That is to say, your mood board, your content, your expertise, and your authenticity. All of those things must be fully formed first before the presentation. And I know that that probably seems obvious and goes without saying, but a lot of times the excitement can overwhelm us and we think, yeah, I've got this great look in mind and I want to just get it out there. But it is very important to take our time and make sure that everything comes together first before we get to that presentation stage. So I said there was two tools. Let's go ahead and move into that second tool. Now, this is where we start to get into more of the language that we use. And you have a very, very powerful tool, and it is the word like. Now, this might seem a little anticlimactic because of its simplicity, but I will show you just how powerful this word can be through the use of a few illustrations. So, for instance, we have our mood board, we bring it to our designer, or maybe we're using it by ourselves and we think, yeah, I want something sort of like this. Now, in my personal experience, when somebody uses the word like, obviously I'm using it as a point of reference to go, okay, I know that this is what they want. But based on how they use it, for instance, somebody will say, yeah, I want something sort of like this or kind of like this. In my mind, as a designer, I think, okay, now I have artistic license to go ahead and interpret this as, as I see fit. So let's go ahead and illustrate this. So imagine for a moment, this is what you, the client, have in mind. And you say, yeah, give me something sort of like this. Well, the designer's interpretation can be a little bit different than what you had in mind, but they're still on track because the end result is sort of like what you asked for. But what happens if there's some abstraction involved? Well, the designer's interpretation can kind of start to get a little far away from what your original example was. That's because we have now entered into what I like to call the like spectrum. And I really wish I could have queued up some Twilight Zone music here. I thought that would have been great. But the like spectrum is basically the designer's interpretation. And as you can see on the bottom half, it can kind of fluctuate pretty wildly. And, that is okay. Um, oh, excuse me. I jumped a slide. Let me jump back really quick. That's okay because this can yield some pretty interesting results, maybe some unexpected things that you didn't have in mind. But as you can see, if we're not using that word correctly, if we're not communicating clearly, we all know that time is money. And this can start to build frustration because let's face it, people in a specialized field like design, they aren't cheap. So this is what can happen. And unfortunately, I have found myself in this position based on poor communication on my end or poor communication on the client's end. And the client can think, well, my time is being wasted, my money's being wasted. And then the designer can start to feel like, well, I'm really good at what I'm doing and I gave them what they asked for. And it creates this conflict and this problem. So really, the key is to be specific. Specificity is the name of the game. Um, and it's funny, a lot of times in the way that we talk in our daily language, we use this word like in so many different ways. So when somebody says, yeah, give me something sort of like or kind of like this, in their mind, they might actually be thinking, give me something just like this. So it's really important, as I said before, to be specific. If what is in your mind is what you're expecting, then we want to make sure that we use that word or that tool like very clearly. And when we have clear communication, this is usually the end result. You're going to have a fantastic relationship with your designer. They're going to love working for you. You're likely going to return to them over and over. And in my case, when I was working as a freelance designer, there was a lot of people that came back to me, and I really enjoyed working with them. So, to kind of wrap this up, if you're designing your site by yourself, it's important to know what you like and why you like it, and learn about the things that you like, what they're called. And you're going to start to kind of pick this up naturally as you're doing Google searches and putting together your mood boards. I saw a question in the chat just a moment ago about mood boards. I will return to that for you. Um, but getting back to this here, when you're hiring a designer to help, it is important to know what you like. As we've seen, it's less important to know what those things are called, but it is important to learn to talk about why you like it. Um, And we've done that through the use of mood boards and things like that. And that bottom point there, I did mention that this would be helpful for people who work with a central design team. So these points are going to be helpful for you when it comes to learning how to talk to people in a central design team, using that language, asking for, being specific when you're asking for things like social media graphics, marketing campaigns, and things like that. So now we're going to get into the resources. As a designer, there's things that I use on a daily basis that I think you're going to find helpful if you're doing this yourself. Um, Books on design that I use. The first one, Color Inspirations, is a fantastic book. This is wonderful. Um, it's a great coffee table book too, if you don't use it that often. But this is a way to make sure that your website looks cohesive when it comes to colors. I'm assuming that you probably already have a logo. So if your logo incorporates colors, this color inspiration book is going to help you find all of the colors that work well with the existing uh, branding or style guide that you might already have. Making and Breaking the Grid is considered essential reading for designers. This is something that does have some kind of high level concepts in there that will take you a little bit of time to understand, but it's not so over your head that you won't be able to put it into practice. So I would highly recommend those two books in particular. If you're looking to hire a designer, Behance and 99 Designs are great places to go for people who, how should I put this? Are they're very talented and they can come with kind of a higher price tag. So if that's somebody that you're looking for, those are sites that you might want to check out. If you're on a budget, I would suggest maybe going to Fiverr or Upwork. Usually you will find designers who are a little bit more affordable because they're usually starting out. It doesn't mean that their quality of work is any less. It just means that, they're probably a little bit more flexible. When it comes to looking for a designer, you're going to want somebody with a strong portfolio that demonstrates their knowledge of web design and not just cool art and graphics. And I'll show you that in the next slide in just a moment. So if you're deciding to do this yourself, Adobe is really the industry standard for design. I use Illustrator and Adobe XD. I personally have not used Figma. I have Sketch, but haven't used it that much. And I know Canva is very good as well. Um, I'm a big fan of Adobe. So that's something that I would suggest using. And they have lots and lots of tutorials, easy to understand. And I think you'll enjoy those if you decide to sign up for their Creative Cloud. So as I said, what to look for when hiring a designer. These are examples from a good friend of mine, Drew Hamlet. He's a web designer and he's the real deal. Drew is very, very good at what he does. I included his link in case you would like to hire him. I know that he is open for design jobs. Also, Clark Beggs is a good friend of mine. And oh my goodness, is that my website down there? Oh, how embarrassing. How did that get there? uh, that you can look at what I do. I don't market myself as a web designer. I don't say that that's something I do, but you can get an understanding of what to look for with somebody who does graphic design. So if I could just direct your attention to these examples here, these were all taken from Drew's website. You can see how he changes his design to fit and suit the needs of the client that he's working with. So for instance, the cupcake website or the bakery, all of those colors, the way I perceive them, are they look like frosting colors to me, which goes hand in hand with the product that they're selling. On the other side, on the left side, now this is what he did for the band Death Cab for Cutie, where he did their website, he did their marketing materials, their album cover, their t-shirts. Everything had a very cohesive look. So if you're going to hire a designer, you're going to want to look for somebody who has a portfolio that demonstrates adaptability is a good thing. Something that you should look for is adaptability when it comes to how they change based on their clients' needs. And Clark also does a really good job of that as well. When it comes to building a website, Zoho Sites and Zoho Commerce are two platforms that you can use. Squarespace and Wix are ones that you're probably already familiar with, as well as Shopify and WordPress. I know that a lot of these offer templates that you can use. They're simple drag and drop. So a lot of times, you might not need the grid that we talked about, but it is still useful even with these drag and drop websites or site builders, excuse me. It's useful to arrange everything on a grid and see if there's a template that comes close to that. When it comes to more resources that can help with your business, Zoho Academy is a place that has a lot of free workbooks that will help you when it comes to implementing some of these ideas that you've learned about today. One of these workbooks is Telling Your Brand Story. Zoho Influence is a website that you can go to for business advice, and that is also a website that I designed. So if you'd like to see something that I've put together, pop on over to Zoho Influence for an example of what I do, but also some really valuable content. And the future, no, that's not a typo. That is how they spell the future over there. That was a huge source of inspiration for the Zoho Academy workbooks. And that's one that I return to time and time again for design inspiration and also good business practices and best practices when it comes to design. So if you enjoyed this, we have more next week. We're going to be talking about converting visitors to leads through web forms, CTAs, and other tools with my good buddy Tyler. He's a very good presenter, so I hope you'll return for that one. And also Zoho One for every business need. You likely have needs, and we probably have an app to fill that need. So I hope you return for that one as well. And I would just like to say thank you. Thanks so much for sticking around and listening to this. Like I said, this is something that's near and dear to my heart, and I've wanted to do something like this for a long time. So I'm really happy that you joined us. And if you have any questions, there will be a question and answer in just a moment, but please feel free to contact me. That's my corporate email address. Zoho does a good job of fostering a collaborative and helpful community. So I would like to make myself available to you if you have any questions or need advice. You can follow what I do at Zoho Influence on Instagram, or as I said, on the Influence website.